The last thing the High Executor saw was a silent cave entrance on a misty ridge and the live vitals of 12 elite assassins blinking on his screen. In under 6 minutes, every signal went dark, no gunfire, no distress call, no struggle. Just silence. And then, from the cave's comms relay, came a single word in an extinct language: return. No one ever did. The mission had been sold to the command board as a footnote, a cleanup job. The High Executor himself had waved it off while chewing stale rations between bureaucratic meetings. 12 of the best. Exosuits, neurotrackers, shadowblade cloaks. All sent to silence an old man who sat too close to the rebel lines, mumbling ancient nonsense inside a worthless cave on an uninhabited jungle moon. It was more insult than threat. That's what they thought. Down on the surface, the team's boots hissed against wet moss. The jungle clung to their armor like it wanted to remember them. Branches snapped without a breeze. Every bird was gone. The lead operative, Corrin, tapped the side of his helmet to recheck motion scans. Nothing. Dead zone. No thermal, no EM, no heat trace. Just the silhouette of the cave ahead, carved into the mountain like it had been waiting since before time had a name. "He's probably dead already," joked a younger assassin, Nash, flicking a small stone toward the entrance. It bounced once, twice, then vanished mid-roll without sound. Cave probably ate him. Corrin didn't laugh. He narrowed his eyes behind the visor, watching how the mist clung to the cave's mouth. It didn't drift. It circled, like it was breathing. He motioned for the others to spread out, quiet and fast. The ground sucked at their boots. Old growth, thick roots, too quiet. Tech refused to work. Comm static rose even inside the same unit. As they approached, they saw a strange mound outside the cave. At first glance, it looked like vines. But then they saw the shine of titanium. It was armor. Not just old, but scorched from the inside out. The sigil on it was Galactic commands from 2 decades prior. An entire infiltration team had been here once, officially declared lost in a meteor strike. Now their gear lay in a neat heap, untouched by weather, but burnt as if by some unseen fire. A whisper of tension rippled through the squad. Inside the cave, there was no light. Not the kind their visors could process. Corrin raised his weapon and stepped into the void. One by one, they followed. Nash lit a shoulder torch, but it flickered like a candle caught in breath. Not wind. Breath. The walls weren't stone. They were something older, etched with symbols no database could translate. Every sound bounced differently, like the cave decided which noise was worth repeating. Then they heard it. A voice. Quiet, near silent, but it vibrated in the bones more than the ears. You come with blades and fire. You seek the end of one who has already ended. The team froze. Scanners spun. No life forms detected. The voice continued. I buried war here. I do not wish to dig it up. Nash cursed and fired into the darkness. The plasma bolt struck a wall and evaporated like it had hit open water. Ripples of light danced across the stone, showing murals, wars, battles, faces screaming in agony, and then the light was gone. Nash turned to speak, but he wasn't there anymore. Just gone. Not a scream. Not a scuffle. One moment a soldier, next moment a whisper of air. Corrin swallowed hard. He scanned the ground. No blood. No impact. No trace of struggle. The squad immediately pulled into formation, weapons raised. But the silence pressed in tighter now, like sound itself was afraid. Another voice came, softer, sadder. Violence remembers violence. You brought only memories. One of the assassins, Myra, gritted her teeth. You think we're scared of an old man chanting riddles in the dark? Show yourself. A shape stepped forward from the deeper dark. Not cloaked. Not armored. Just robed, barefoot, hands clasped loosely in front. The monk was old, yes, but not fragile. His eyes gleamed not with power, but with peace. A dangerous kind of peace. Like someone who had survived 1,000 wars and stopped keeping score. Corrin leveled his weapon. Stand down and be detained. You are a classified threat to command stability. The monk gave the faintest smile. I am not the threat. You brought that with you. Then the ground beneath the team cracked, not an earthquake, but a pulse. A memory. One operative's vision went black. Another dropped to her knees, gasping for breath she could no longer find. Corin's HUD screamed errors, then died. They were blind. Cut off. Not by tech failure, but by something ancient and deliberate. One of the soldiers screamed and fired wildly. The light from his muzzle flashed just long enough for Corin to see shadows crawling up the walls, shadows shaped like men, warriors, all with empty faces. Not illusions. Not tricks. Echoes. The monk stepped aside and sat on a smooth stone, as if waiting for the storm to pass. He poured tea into a small clay bowl and sipped once. The aroma filled the space. Somehow, it brought tears to the eyes of the last soldier standing. He didn't know why. Outside, above the cave, the mist coiled upward like smoke. The Recon drone perched on a ledge exploded in a burst of static. In orbit, the executor watched the last vitals flicker. Silence. Then, one final comm signal broke through, though it was impossible, untraceable, unpermitted, off-band. One word, spoken softly by a calm voice. Return. And then, nothing. Not static. Not failure. Just, nothing. Executor Vaughn stood at the viewport and stared at the planet below. A jungle moon with a cave. No hostile installations. No known threats. No evidence of engagement. 12 assassins in full combat loadout had vanished without a trace, and the only signal he had was a single, disobedient whisper in a language that hadn't been spoken since before the stars were mapped. In the mist below, the old monk set his bowl down, rose to his feet, and walked slowly back into the shadows. The cave exhaled gently, as though satisfied. The jungle, untouched and green, began to sing again. The cave did not merely house the monk. It was his companion, his confessor, his penance. Long before the Galactic Command feared him, long before rebels whispered his name like a myth, Taran had buried something deep in its stone heart, his past. Not just memories, but the kind of sins that had names and coordinates, targets and tallies. Once, he had been called Warden Taran, a name spoken in battlefield briefings and execution warrants. A war general sculpted by blood and purpose, built not for peace but to end it on his terms. But peace had a price, and he paid it by vanishing when his own conscience finally screamed louder than the orders in his ear. Years ago, long before the jungle swallowed the world outside the cave, a younger Taran had stood at its entrance in full war gear. Plasma shield crackling at his back, armor still dripping with the remains of a rebel stronghold that never saw it coming. He had looked into the cave then, expecting to find shelter for a night, maybe silence for a few hours. Instead, he found the opposite of silence. He found a voice, not one that came from lips, but from the stone itself. A voice that did not command, but invited. And for the first time, Taran had removed his helmet, knelt, and listened. He stayed. He unbuckled his armor, piece by piece. Dug a hole and buried it. The ground did not resist. It accepted. He abandoned war the way a man sheds skin he no longer needs. His hands, once skilled in dismantling machines of death, turned to cultivating a garden just outside the mouth of the cave. It was never much. A few roots. A vine or two. Yet they flourished beyond what the soil should have allowed. Animals came and went but never disturbed the crops. Storms passed, but never touched the stones. The jungle learned to flow around him, like a river finding a new bed. In the present, inside the cave, the air held a thick silence, the kind that felt full rather than empty. Corin knelt beside Mara, one of the few assassins still conscious. Her face was pale, eyes unfocused, lips whispering fragmented memories. Not hers. Not recent. Names of people long dead. Cities lost before her birth. She was muttering the casualty reports of campaigns even command had buried. Corin had no words for this. He'd been in Black Ops units across 3 galaxies. Fought in the acid storms of Veln. Slaughtered mine screamers on the sulfur cliffs of Thana. But nothing had prepared him for this slow, relentless erosion of identity. Something deep in the cave shifted. Not a movement. A feeling. Like the stone remembered more than the people inside it ever could. Corrin grabbed his weapon, but it felt wrong in his hands now. He wasn't sure why. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. The kind a soldier only gets once, when they realize the war they are in is no longer theirs to win. He activated his emergency flare. A brilliant burst of red fire filled the cavern, and in that moment, shadows danced against the walls. Not tricks of light, but figures. People. Soldiers. Some of them wore galactic command sigils. Others wore nothing but rags. All of them were screaming. Not in pain, but in memory. Then the flare died, and so did Mara's voice. She slumped over, breathing shallow, eyes finally closed. Not dead. Not damaged. Just quiet. Corrin didn't move. The others had scattered deeper into the cave. He'd seen Nash vanish and now Mara fall into some kind of trance. That left 5 others unaccounted for, but no one was responding to pings. Their comms were offline, and when he tried a pulse scan, the cave returned the same answer every time: one lifeform detected. Always one. No matter how many were inside. The monk stepped into view again. He wasn't glowing. Wasn't floating. He didn't wield a weapon or hover with power. He just walked like someone who had nothing left to fear. He sat down on the same stone as before, carefully, deliberately, and spoke as if continuing a conversation from years ago. There was a time when I would have killed you before your foot touched that moss. That was who I was. You remind me of him. You fight too fast. You believe too quickly. Corrin didn't answer. He couldn't. Every protocol he'd memorized, every kill sequence he'd drilled, none of it fit this. He watched as the monk took out a small clay cup from inside his robe, poured water into it from a bamboo flask, and took a sip. The water didn't steam. It didn't glow. It was just water. But the sound of it being poured echoed like thunder across the walls. I've been here long enough to know that some weapons never leave your hand, the monk said, looking not at Corrin but at the wall of shadows. Some of them live inside your eyes, or behind your voice. That's the price of surviving wars meant to be forgotten. Corrin forced his lips to move. You were command. The monk gave the faintest nod. They called me Warden. I answered because it was easier than listening to silence. But when I finally heard the silence, I stayed. This cave showed me things no command ever could. It showed me what was left of me after the killing. Behind them, a scream echoed. Sharp, human, terrified. One of the others. Then silence. Corrin didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the monk. Why did you let us in? You weren't here for answers, the monk replied. You came for a body. A confirmation kill. Your minds were already made before your boots hit the moss. Corrin tightened his grip on his rifle. You're not a monk. You're a weapon. The monk's eyes didn't harden. They softened. As though the accusation was not new, but familiar. Like a wound that had never closed. I was. Then I stopped answering the trigger. From deeper in the cave came another sound. Not a scream this time. Laughter. But twisted. Fractured. The kind a man makes when his mind snaps. Corrin knew the voice. Jace. Their explosives specialist. Then came the sound of weeping. Then nothing. I'm losing my team, Corrin whispered, more to himself than anyone else. No, said the monk quietly. They are remembering who they were. That's harder. Corrin looked at his hands. They trembled now. Not from fear. From recognition. For the first time in his life, he realized he didn't know what he looked like without a weapon in them. Didn't remember a version of himself that wasn't aiming at something. The monk stood again and turned, walking deeper into the dark. His final words before fading into the stone were soft, but not sad. You came to kill a man who no longer exists. What remains here is only the memory of what war leaves behind. You can walk away, but not until you see what's left of you. And with that, the cave exhaled again. One of the lights flickered back to life. Just one. A path barely lit. Corrin looked at it, then at his rifle, and realized it felt heavier than ever. The air grew thicker the deeper Corrin walked, not with dust or heat, but with something he couldn't name. It pressed against his skin like memory, crawling under the suit's armor plating and wrapping around his spine like vines. The narrow stone walls of the path lit by that single flickering light seemed to breathe with him, expanding and contracting in rhythm with his uneasy lungs. Every few steps, he thought he heard whispers, but they weren't coming from behind or ahead, they were coming from within. Old voices, once drowned out by orders and war cries, now echoed louder than his own thoughts. He passed the discarded remains of an infiltration drone, its eye lens shattered, the exposed circuits melted in a strange spiral pattern. The design looked deliberate, almost sacred, not the aftermath of weaponry but of intention. Someone had ended its function with calm precision. He crouched briefly and touched the remains, and his fingers brushed a piece of cloth tucked underneath the wreckage, a strip of uniform bearing the same insignia Corrin wore now. It wasn't his. But the blood on it was fresh. Further in, the tunnel widened into a circular chamber, the stone walls curved and lined with carvings far older than any civilization Command had recorded. Dozens of symbols wrapped around the room like a language that had chosen to forget itself. In the center of the chamber stood another operative, Dane, standing perfectly still, eyes wide, mouth slack. His weapon was at his feet. He didn't look injured. He didn't even look afraid. He looked empty. Corrin approached cautiously, calling his name. Dane didn't respond. When he stepped closer, he saw why. The man's pupils weren't reacting. He was seeing something, but not what was in front of him. As Corrin reached out to touch his shoulder, Dane's lips moved. "I saw it," he whispered. "The cities we erased. They weren't empty. They weren't targets. We were told they were staging posts. But they were homes. Children. Markets. Not rebels. Just people." Corrin felt a sharp chill as he pulled his hand back. Dane blinked once, then slowly sat down and placed his hands on his knees like a monk at prayer. He didn't look at Corrin. He just stared into the stone, quietly repeating coordinates like confessions. Corrin turned and moved on, his mind burning with fragments. The mission briefing. The black file with redacted paragraphs. The insistence that this old man was a destabilizing figure who'd once led a mass slaughter. Now it didn't feel like a target profile. It felt like a lie built on top of something buried too deep to reach with truth alone. He walked another corridor, guided by soft pulses of light that blinked from within the walls like the heartbeat of the cave itself. Around the next bend, he found Jace, his demolitions expert, kneeling before a small altar carved into the rock. The altar bore no god, no idol, just a single shallow bowl of water, clear and unmoving. Jace looked back over his shoulder, eyes wild with the gleam of something broken. "I set charges," he said. "Tried to bring it down. Whole place. Stone didn't crack. It bent. Like it was listening. Then it showed me what happened after the last place we leveled. Do you know what it showed me? The survivors. The ones who lived. What they became. They built hospitals from our wreckage. Raised their dead with our ration packs. And I called them insects while I laughed." Corrin stood still, heart pounding, unsure if the silence around them was respect or judgment. He moved to step forward, but Jace reached into his pack and pulled out a handful of explosives, live. He didn't arm them. He just held them out in trembling hands and let them fall into the bowl. The water didn't splash. It absorbed. Not even a ripple. The detonators vanished. "I'm done fighting things that don't bleed," Jace whispered, and sat back, legs folded beneath him, eyes closing. Corrin didn't try to move him. He continued alone. By the time he reached the next chamber, his armor felt heavier than it should have. His breath fogged against the inside of his visor despite temperature controls. Ahead, the monk stood beneath a beam of soft natural light leaking in through a split in the stone ceiling. It was the only daylight he'd seen since entering. The monk had his back to him and was tracing something in the dirt with his foot. When Corrin got closer, he saw it was a spiral. The same spiral etched onto old gear, painted on the walls, burned into the drones. It wasn't a signature. It was a warning. Corrin raised his rifle slowly. The action was muscle memory. His finger found the trigger without thought, but his hand shook. He wasn't sure if it was the weight of the weapon or the memory of the people it had silenced. The monk didn't turn around. "Your brothers have seen the cave," he said softly. "Now you must walk through your own." Corrin gritted his teeth. "I don't want visions. I want answers." The monk finally turned, and his face was calm. Not smug. Not angry. Just calm. "Then let the cave answer." The ground trembled faintly, not with violence but with resonance. The stone beneath Corrin's feet shifted like sand. The chamber around him changed, not visually, but emotionally. The walls didn't move, but what he saw changed. Faces. Not of the dead, but of the ones who had ordered the deaths. High officers. Strategists. And among them, younger versions of himself. Training. Marching. Laughing. Each moment layered atop another like sediment. Then he saw the face of a child he didn't recognize. Then another. All staring. None accusing. Just existing. He dropped his rifle. It hit the stone with a metallic clatter and slid into the spiral drawn in the dust. The lines lit up, not brightly, just enough to pulse once. Then silence again. The monk walked past him slowly and picked up the rifle. He held it like an old artifact, as if it didn't belong in this time. He offered it back. Corrin didn't take it. "I don't know what to do anymore," Corrin whispered. "Then you are ready to begin," the monk said. And from the far end of the chamber, another figure appeared. It was Dane. Still pale. Still quiet. But his steps were calm. Behind him, Jace followed, then Mara. One by one, those who had survived the cave's memory emerged, not healed, but changed. They didn't speak. They didn't salute. They simply stood beside Corrin and waited. The monk turned and gestured toward a narrow opening in the far wall, just wide enough to pass through. Beyond it, light spilled in like morning breaking for the first time. No one moved toward it. Not yet. They simply stared. Because now they understood. The cave had not been a tomb for a warrior. It had been a crucible. And what came out of it would no longer be soldiers. Above the jungle moon, the Galactic command vessel known as the Ordnance Crown floated in silent orbit, its hull bristling with scanners and weapon banks. Inside, the High Executive Vaughn paced through a dim corridor, tension simmering just beneath his calm exterior. There were no new updates from the assassin squad. Their life signs had gone dark hours ago, and every probe sent into the atmosphere failed before crossing the tree line. It wasn't a technical error. The jungle didn't permit that technology anymore. What unsettled him most wasn't the silence. It was the single, inexplicable word that had broken through the encrypted lines: return. A word spoken in a dead tongue no longer taught in command academies. A word they tried to erase. He entered the intelligence chamber, where rows of analysts and officers sat in front of flickering holoscreens filled with static. The transmission logs repeated the same sequence: 12 names, all tagged unreachable, with no coordinates, no beacons, no biological data. As he stared at the display, something unusual happened. The names began to vanish. One by one, the tags blinked and were replaced with a single phrase: seen. No one typed it. No one accessed the system. The text appeared by itself, written in the ancient spiral symbol. Vaughn snapped at his command engineer to isolate the source, but the system responded with a distorted voice. Not synthetic. Not machine. A human voice. Calm. Male. Familiar. You buried my past beneath medals and lies. I left your war. I left your blood. And still, you sent them. I forgave you once. Do not ask again. The room fell dead silent. The screens shut off. And in the center of the command table, the spiral appeared, etched into the metal, red-hot and smoking. Vaughn backed away slowly, the fear finally registering in his eyes. This wasn't a failure of a mission. This was a reckoning. Back on the surface, the cave had changed again. It no longer whispered. It no longer weighed down their souls. It had become still, expectant. Like it had finished speaking and was now listening. Corrin stood at the edge of the final corridor, the one that led out through the narrow stone throat toward the morning light. Behind him, the others stood silently, each marked by something invisible. They had not been broken. They had been turned inside out and asked to look. Most of them had survived that long enough to choose something different. But none had spoken of going back. The monk stepped forward and gestured toward the exit. This path is yours now. Not forced. Not ordered. Chosen. You may leave as you are, or stay and become something else. Corrin glanced at his comrades. Mara nodded faintly. Dane looked older somehow. Jace still clutched his demolition pouch, though the explosives inside had turned to stone. No one moved toward the light. It wasn't time yet. Corrin turned to the monk. What is this place, really? The monk's gaze drifted upward, as if he could see through the cave ceiling and into the sky beyond. This was once a war temple. A place where warriors came to be remade before returning to battle. But war changed. Purpose decayed. This place outlasted its use, so it became something else. It remembered pain. And it waited. For what? For someone willing to listen. A soft rumble passed through the stone beneath them. It wasn't hostile. It was like a deep exhale. The cave, having done what it was meant to do, had released them. Corrin stepped forward and walked toward the exit. Light crept across his face, revealing every scar, every line he hadn't noticed until now. The others followed in silence. Not in formation. Not in file. Together. When they emerged, the jungle greeted them with birdsong. Not manufactured tones, not alerts, just the natural sounds of a world that had never asked for war and had grown over its remnants with quiet defiance. They stood beneath a canopy of green gold, the air rich with warmth. None of their tech flickered back online. The suits remained dead. But none of them reached for weapons. Not anymore. A low roar passed overhead. They looked up and saw the silhouette of the ordnance crown-breaking atmosphere, descending low over the jungle. Command had sent reinforcements. Perhaps not assassins this time, but soldiers. Warships to reduce the mountain to rubble if necessary. Corrin's eyes narrowed. He looked at the monk, who still stood just within the cave's mouth, watching with no trace of alarm. They'll destroy this place, Corrin said. No, the monk replied gently. They'll try. But this place is not stone. It is truth. And truth is not so easily broken. The jungle around them shimmered as the ship passed overhead. But it did not fire. Instead, it hovered. Confused. Unable to lock on. As if the jungle did not exist in its system's eyes. Inside the ship, panic set in. Logs erased themselves. Maps twisted into spirals. All command protocols failed. Executive Vaughn barked orders until the bridge lights flickered and went out. When they returned, he found himself alone. The crew had vanished. In every direction he looked, he saw only reflections of himself, younger, older, stained with victories that now felt like losses. The spiral etched itself across the main viewport. Not molten. Just frost. Back below, Corrin turned away from the hovering ship and back toward the jungle. What now? The monk stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. Now, you decide who you become without someone else's orders. And if they send more, they will. The monk's voice was neither hopeful nor grim. Just certain. But you've walked through the memory. Now you can show others the way. From the tree line emerged a small group of travelers. Not soldiers. Civilians. Rebels. Children. They had come seeking shelter. Word had spread of a place in the jungle that was protected not by weapons, but by something far older. They approached with caution, until they saw the monk, and something in their bodies relaxed. Some smiled. Some cried. One simply dropped to his knees and whispered thanks. Corrin watched them, then looked down at the command badge still clipped to his chest. Without hesitation, he unpinned it and dropped it into the moss, where it was quickly swallowed by the earth. He stepped forward to help the travelers. And far above, the warship began to drift, pulled not by gravity, but by memory. Its engines died without a sound. Its orbit decayed. It vanished into the clouds. The cave, now quiet, stood behind them. It had no guards, no barriers, but none would enter unless they were ready. The jungle didn't hide it. It waited. For time did not pass in the jungle the way it did elsewhere. The sun still rose, the rain still came, but the people who had walked out of that cave no longer marked their lives by standard cycles or deployment schedules. They moved by instinct now, by purpose, by a deeper rhythm than any clock could measure. Word of the cave spread faster than any official report could contain. They didn't try to stop it. Galactic Command issued denials, claimed equipment malfunctions, labeled the cave as a natural hazard zone. But whispers leaked out anyway, about soldiers who entered ready to kill and emerged unwilling to follow orders, about a monk who wore no armor yet disarmed entire squadrons with a single sentence, about a cave that remembered every war waged near its walls and showed you what your part in it really looked like. Corrin had not returned to orbit. None of them had. They'd shed their uniforms like old skin, not in shame, but in understanding. They no longer belonged to war. They belonged to what came after. The group of travelers who arrived in the days after the mission failure had become the first of many. Some were rebels seeking safety. Some were deserters, worn thin by endless bloodshed. Others were simply people who had lost everything and had nowhere left to go. They brought nothing with them but wounds, some visible, most not. The monk did not question their presence. He greeted each one the same way, with quiet eyes and tea that seemed to calm the soul faster than sleep. Corrin helped build shelters from fallen trees, taught the travelers how to walk through the jungle without fear. Jace turned his knowledge of explosives toward mining rock for water reservoirs. Mara became a guardian, not with weapons, but with words. When one traveler threatened another, it was her voice that stopped it, not through power, but through a presence earned in that cave. Dane, once a marksman known for executing without hesitation, spent his days drawing the spiral symbol into the dirt for children who asked what it meant. When they repeated it, they didn't say it was a weapon or a warning. They said it meant to look inside before looking out. No one called them soldiers anymore. The cave no longer opened for just anyone. Some travelers walked into the stone mouth and came back within minutes, unchanged. Some stayed for hours, came out shaking or silent. A few never went in at all. That was the cave's choice. No one forced entry. No one asked for explanations. It had become a place not of answers, but of understanding. What it offered wasn't power. It was memory, and memory had weight. Some people were ready to carry it. Some weren't. From time to time, shadows passed across the clouds, drones, scout ships, low-orbit surveillance craft sent by a command still pretending it had control. None of them landed. None of them saw anything worth reporting. Sensors detected only vegetation, maybe heat traces from wildlife, but never the true settlement. It was as though the land itself denied their existence. As if the jungle had sided with the forgotten. The monk remained unchanged. He didn't lead, didn't command. He watched. When people asked him questions, he answered with riddles that made more sense hours later. Sometimes, he disappeared into the jungle for days. No one followed. He always returned. When a child once asked him if he was a ghost, he smiled and said, "Not yet." One morning, a woman arrived alone. She wore command colors but had removed the insignia. Her boots were worn, her eyes hard, but she did not carry a weapon. She asked for Corrin by name. The villagers grew quiet as he stepped out to meet her. She didn't salute. She didn't explain how she'd found them. She only said one sentence. "I want to see what you saw." He didn't answer. He only nodded and turned toward the cave. They walked side by side, neither of them speaking. At the entrance, she paused. Her breath hitched, just for a second. He said nothing. She stepped inside. When she emerged hours later, the sun had shifted. Her posture was different. Her face was wet. She sat with Corrin in the grass and stared into the trees. She didn't speak of what she'd seen. Neither did he. But she didn't leave. More followed. Former captains. Ex-intelligence officers. One was an old engineer who had helped design orbital weapon platforms and had never touched soil in 30 years. They arrived with guilt buried under duty, hoping for redemption. The cave didn't promise that. It promised only truth. And truth didn't erase wounds. It showed them to you, forced you to sit with them, and let you decide whether you'd keep carrying them or finally let them fall. Years passed. The world changed. Command shrank. Its territories fractured. Entire sectors declared autonomy. The great fleets dissolved into war bands or were abandoned in orbit, left to rust in silence. People began to say the wars had eaten themselves. No one had won. Everyone had simply stopped. The settlement near the cave never named itself. No banners flew. No government formed. It didn't need leaders. Those who arrived were given food, shelter, and space. Those who caused harm were walked to the edge of the jungle and asked to choose again. Some returned better. Some didn't return at all. There were no prisons. No walls. Just the spiral, drawn in clay, carved in wood, whispered into the night. One night, as a storm rolled in from the distant sea, Corrin sat beneath the canopy watching the clouds flash blue and gold. The monk joined him without a word. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of insects and the distant hush of the cave. Corrin finally spoke. "Do you think they'll come again?" The monk nodded once. "They will." "And what then?" The monk took a slow breath and exhaled. "Then we'll teach them to see." Lightning flashed overhead. The wind picked up. Somewhere in the cave, stones shifted like a door cracking open. But no one went inside that night. The rain fell gentle and cold, washing over the earth like forgiveness. The cave didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its story had already been told. And it had been heard.